type of it's okay. Lester Roloff used to just start off talking rambling too, so I'll do it as well. And so it's going to be difficult. I will be kind, because I realize everybody's got to grow. And when you wake up one day and realize your culture isn't necessarily rooted in Scripture, it's a hard thing to swallow. When everything that around you says this is what Christianity is, and you find out, well, there's Christianity in there, but a lot of it's just your culture. And and here's the philosophy I have. As I showed last time, I don't mind starting out here, but here's what I thought. Like we talked about the robes, which I just think is a joyous thing to discover, even though I'm not a robe wearer myself, except bathrobes, and and I'll have a robe. I could wear a robe when I stood up and preach, right? We've got it hanging up, and it's like this is the struggle I have. Do I wear it? Don't I wear it? You know what I'm saying? But obviously, and what I'm really struggling with is the stole, because if I wear a robe, I want a stole, and I want a nice long stole. Anyway, but most people rejected that on the basis of formalism. It wasn't necessarily because there was anything biblically wrong with it. They just associated with formalism, which is associated with Roman Catholicism, and so they kind of backed away from it. But nevertheless, putting all that aside, here we saw the hair and the robes, and we looked at different things. So I understand that, and there's a lot more we could have looked at. Just not interested in going that far into it. But here's my general philosophy, because a lot of things like it's a shame for a man to have long hair. It didn't say it was a sin, right? There's obviously we know God doesn't like it, but He never actually said, I'm going to strike you for it. Okay, and Mary put it out very clearly when Samson had long hair by instruction. Absalom had long hair too, but he was a rebel, so I wouldn't count him as an example. But at the same time, it does clearly state that it's a shame for a man to have long hair, and it's in there. So here's been my philosophy all along. Okay, and I can illustrate it best with an event that took place when we were in England. We used to go because we lived technically in the Greater London area, but also in the county of Kent. Okay, and we would dart out to the coast a lot and spend time at Dover. Everybody knows the White Cliffs of Dover, right? A blue bird flew over the white. Anyway, so we'd go out there and spend time at Dover Castle and walk along the cliffs and things like that. And one day we're out there walking, and what most people don't realize is the cliffs are eroding. Okay, the sea air is eroding because it's just chalk. Well, it's not. It's like chalk. It's the best thing to describe it. And so it's not the most stable material in existence. It's just a big pile of it, huge, that make up the coasts of Dover. But with the salt water and it's slowly eroding. So as you're walking along the cliffs, there are multiple paths. Okay. And there's one that takes you right on the edge of the cliffs. And I'm talking about you're that far off from the edge. That path has a little sign, okay, that warns you that the cliffs are eroding and that they cannot guarantee that the part you're standing on isn't going to drop out from underneath your feet if you're taking that path because it's so close to the edge of the cliff. They don't stop you from going there, but they warn you that the closer to the edge of the cliff you are, the higher your probability of falling off. Okay, from a sudden wind gust or the cliff just collapsing underneath you, or, you know what I'm saying? And it collapses like those, excuse me, it collapses like you see those iceberg things, and it just collapses down. That's what happens. And if you're standing there, you're going down. There's no fences. But how could you establish a fence on something that's going to collapse anyway? So they don't forbade you from going down that path, but you take the risk when you go down that path. And then there's another path. It's a little higher up. It's like, you take the high road, now I'll take the low road. No. But you take this. Now, the views aren't as breathtaking. But if the cliff should crumble, you're not going down with it. If there should be a sudden gust of wind, you're not getting knocked over, because it's a good 20, 30 feet to the edge on this cliff. You know what I'm saying? Again, not as good as view, but it's a whole lot safer. Okay. Then there's another path even further that just cuts through the meadow. And that's got really rotten views. Okay, but they don't even worry about warning you there because you're so far away from danger. There's no reason to put a warning up. Now I say all that to say this: one time we were there, and I was hoping to walk right along the edge of the thing, and I looked and I saw that sign. And my nature, as you know, I'm not a thrill seeker, so I'm like, So I took a higher path to stay further away from the danger. But we were there with some kids at the time, and they wanted to go right down that, thing, and they made it out the other side. They did. There was no problem. They didn't get blown off the cliff. The cliff didn't crouch underneath them, and so they mocked me and made fun of me because of the fact that I took the higher road and didn't get to see the things that they saw, but I also didn't take the risks they took. And when it comes to things where God expresses his dislike but doesn't say no, doesn't put a thou shalt not, okay, but just says this, I don't like this, this is my opinion of this. You understand, it's the same kind of situation. You can do it, sure, but you're like taking that path right along the edge. You're closer to stepping over a line that will absolutely be a thou shalt not and a thou shalt, okay, because you're pushing God's patience. You're riding on the edge. I just don't have that attitude. I would rather be as far back from what displeases God as I can possibly be. And I could go through countless illustrations. Eve was never told not to touch the apple. It wasn't an apple, but she was never told. She wasn't told she couldn't climb it, the tree. She wasn't told she couldn't lick it. Right? She was just told she couldn't eat it. So she could have had it all. She could have decorated her entire house in it. She didn't have a house, but she could have. She could have sat there and licked it all day long, as long as she didn't eat it. Technically, she could have had it in her mouth and then spit it out. Right? But then common sense says, well, yeah, but the closer you are to swallowing it, the closer you are to suffering the consequences. So best thing to do is stay far away from the tree as you possibly can, And so there is just that common sense element, okay, that we call discretion, okay, that we call integrity. It's just where this is how I don't want to accidentally cross over a line that will displease the Lord. So if the Lord expresses displeasure, even though he didn't say it's a sin, okay, then I just want to stay as far back away from that as possible, you see. And that way we don't come up with these punch lists and rules and, and things like that. Just the attitude of, I just don't want to displease the Lord. So I'm going to try to stay as far back from what displeases him as I can. Maybe the view won't be as good. And, and people who walk on the edge sometimes mock people who stay further back. Say, well, there's nothing in Scripture that says you should. I will fully acknowledge that. Okay. And you may live your whole life right there on the edge and never cross over. I completely not. And I may walk the higher path and trip over a rock. But we're not talking about my rock. We're talking about God saying, I don't want you falling over this cliff. And you've lived your whole life right there on the edge. And who do you think God's worried more about? Me back over here far away from the cliff, or them right there on the edge of the cliff? And the tragedy would be, what would happen if those cliff had crumbled underneath those children? Right? How tragic that would have been for the parents and for all, right? And it was a simple choice. Isn't life just choices and the results of those choices? You choose to do what God recommends or orders, or you don't. You choose to trust Christ, or you don't. And even this morning's Proverbs kind of going to go down that line. Look at Proverbs 23. You didn't think I was going to get there, did you? Proverbs 23, verse 1. I'm an old college teacher. I can take any distraction and turn it to where I want to go. But I'm just my own distraction now as a pastor. And but Proverbs 23, verse number 1. When thou sittest to eat with a ruler, consider diligently what is before thee, and put a knife to thy throat if thou be a man given to appetite. Be not desirous of his dainties, for they are deceitful meats. Now, some people take these three scriptures and they really hammer hard on gluttony. And I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with hammering on that. But that's not what's really going on here, is it? Because we have a situation, don't we? When thou sittest to eat with a ruler. So this is not just eating, is it? This is eating in a specific situation. Okay? And when thou sittest with a ruler, consider diligently what is before thee. Put a knife to thy throat if thou be a man given to appetite. Be not desirous of his dainties, for they are deceitful meats. So is the problem really here the fact that this man is a man given to appetite? Or is the problem of where he's at? The problem is where he's at, isn't it? The problem is he's sitting in front of a ruler. Okay? And when sitting in front of a ruler, one must ask oneself, how did he get invited to this dinner in the first place? And again, I'm not saying he's done anything wrong, okay? But he's obviously, this is a situation in which the writer of the proverb is saying sometimes you get invited to these situations in which you're sitting in front of the seat of power, the ruler. And if you're being invited out to dinner with the ruler, what is typically the motivation behind that? The ruler just wants to spend time with you and have fun? No. Rulers are always strategizing, right? They're always manipulating the situation. They're always trying to arrange things to either sustain or increase their power. Okay? And so rulers will have banquets. And they will invite people to these banquets, right? It's not just willy-nilly. They invite intentionally. Sometimes they're trying to strengthen alliances, and sometimes they're trying to create alliances. And to be invited to one of these banquets, or not to be invited, is a massive political statement, especially amongst the ruling classes. Okay? Because if you're not invited to one of the functions, then you're considered an outcast, a social pariah. And you will be, because you weren't invited to Lady so-and-so's banquet or Duke so-and-so's, whatever, okay? And so it's a serious thing. So he says, when you're sitting with a ruler, okay, consider diligently what is before you, right? So you're sitting there, and the first admonition is don't lose your wits, okay? You're not sitting amongst innocent friends, okay? You're sitting in a situation in which someone is trying to accomplish something. You say, well, I know. Verse 3, be not desirous of his dainties, for they are what? Deceitful meats, right? What does it mean, deceitful? It means it's like fishing. The ruler's got a hook, he puts bait on it, and he throws it out there, and he's trying to see what he can catch. So this dinner that is going on here, he's saying to especially those who are a man given to appetite, someone who just enjoys the party life, okay? And he's enjoying this party, and he's reveling, okay? And at this party, and he's eating to excess or whatever, it'd be very careful because there's a hook in that apple. There's a hook in that worm, okay? And when you go and you try, again, but the ring of caution is here is simply this, is that this is a power grab meal. It's what it is. The ruler's looking for loyalty. Most likely the person that decided to go was very excited about going, but why? Power. And power is a very seductive product. Influence, or as we call it sometimes, or power or rule is a very seductive thing. And what happens when people become obsessed with power? What's the old proverb? Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. And so what happens? What do we do when we see someone that seems like they rise, from the common man, right? And then we're cheering them as they succeed, and then all of a sudden we see them hobnobbing with the powers that have been there. And what do we always suspect? They're being bought off. They're being corrupted, right? What's the fear? And again, I'm just putting it out there. I'm not saying there is truth to it, but not an absolute truth. That Washington corrupts people. Like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Remember that old program with Jimmy Stewart? Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Simple, sweet little guy, went there thinking everything was so pie in the sky and perfect, and there was all kinds of backroom deals and stuff like that going on, and so we have that situation, right? Because even the fellow senator, used to be like him, but over time had become bought by businessmen, who in the end tries to, I'm not going to go into the story, but what happened? He was corrupted. He was corrupted by the system because he became hungry for power. And where are most of those deals done? They're not done in Senate hearings. It's not where they make these decisions. Those are sound bites and video clips that they're doing there. The decision's already been made. Where was it made? Some party someplace where two power mongers were sitting around sipping a martini or whatever the case was and gave in, and made a deal and then had to let it play out in the public scene. But the decision had already been made. Isn't it wonderful how even if you're one of those people who are prone to watching these things, that there's no surprise how it turns out? Because you're watching something scripted, and you've watched scripted things all your life, and you can predict what's going to happen. And even if every now and then there's kind of a gotcha moment, it really doesn't change the outcome because it was all scripted. Because power is very seductive. And here the proverb guy says, he's saying simply this: if you've been called and you're sitting down in front of a ruler and you're a person given to appetite, or you're prone it's funny, he's telling me to stand up. What do you think I've been doing for the last 50 minutes? But if, you know what I'm saying, then you be very careful. You be mindful of the situation you find yourself in, because you're in a very dangerous situation that you could find yourself corrupted. Churches do this. Churches are hungry for power or cultural influence. And so they will snuggle up next to politicians. Politicians who we know don't believe. Okay? But they'll snuggle up next to them. They'll try to justify who they are and what they are and why they are, and in order to get power, in order to get influence. Okay? And the churches think they're the ones in charge of this. But in reality, the ruler is using them as a tool of influence over the congregation or congregations that they're in charge of. Right? Because interestingly enough, I've met a person who is a highly conservative, socially conservative Roman Catholic, very, very conservative, but is extremely disappointed in the current Pope and even in the current whoever's in charge of New Mexico. What do they call those? Bishop. Because I mentioned to them one day, I said, you would think with the heavy Catholic influence in this state that abortion wouldn't be that big of an issue. I just, threw it out there because most Catholic platforms are anti-abortion. So I'm just surprised it runs amok in this state. You would think with all the Catholics in this state, that they could outvote anything like that. You would just think. She said to me very bluntly, she goes, no, because our bishop wants power. And he won't push the governor because he wants to stay close to the governor. We'll see what the governor did. You think it's the bishop running the governor, but it's the governor just ran the bishop. If you want power, then you better not say anything about my agenda. And so he won't, because he wants to be able to sit down and eat with the governor. And they know it. Because they don't want what the agenda is. But yet, they can't get it overturned, even though head count wise, they should have the vote. They should be able to push it back. They should be able to get rid of it, right? But they can't. Why? Because the powers that be won't let them, because somebody's sitting down, somebody wants power, and because they want power, they will not take a stand for Christ. Won't do it. Because they don't want to lose the power. And this is where corruption enters our churches. And it doesn't have to be Roman Catholic. It could be anybody. As soon as you see a preacher snuggling up next to a political leader, you better watch out. Corruption's coming. Because in most cases, they just don't realize how crafty the politician really is. And everything's well scripted and everything's a photo op. Okay? And then all of a sudden, that preacher, you look at Jerry Falwell with his moral majority, who got sucked into that, and then later on said it was the worst thing he ever did, because he didn't need to be in the realm of politics. He needed to be back at his pulpit, but he wanted that power and that influence. So that's what they created the moral majority or minority or whatever they called it. Remember? And until he got playing politics, but they always realized at the end of the day they've been had. And so the warning here is not about gluttony, okay? Because the warning starts out with, if you're sitting with a ruler, don't desire his dainties. Okay? For they are deceitful meat. There is nothing that a human ruler can give you that Christ can't give you. And when you think that one day Christ is going to come rule and reign forever, It'd be far better to snuggle up next to Christ than to snuggle up next to a human ruler. You say, oh, well, we'll lose our influence over the culture. But the moment you're corrupt, you've lost your influence over the culture anyway, and the culture's influenced you. You can't snuggle up next to the politician and think you're going to change anything. The politician ought to be coming to the church and sitting, you know what I'm saying? Why is it that the preachers go to the house of politics, but we don't see the politician coming to the house of worship? Why is it we see the preacher compromising with the politician, but we don't see the politician getting right with God? Now, you show me a politician comes down, balls his eyes out, and prays and repents. Now you got something going on, but he won't be in politics long. They'll get rid of him fast. Because they ain't going to have none of that stuff. Okay? But this power-hungry stuff, we have to be careful of. Jude warns about that. In the little epistle of Jude, he talks about people who are power-hungry. Rich, power-hungry people. And in fact, let me read you a verse from over there. And let me share that verse with you. Here we go. So it's Jude, verse 12. These are spots in your feasts of charity, when they feast with you, feeding themselves without fear. Clouds they are without water, carried about of winds, trees whose fruit wherewith withereth, without fruit, twice dead, plucked up by the roots. Why? Because they're not interested in righteousness, and they're not interested in getting close to the Lord. They're interested in one thing, power. And in the end, they're just empty. Now we go to the next section I want to look at this morning in Proverbs, and that's the next verses 4 down to verse 9. Labor not to be rich. Cease from thine own wisdom. Wilt thou set thine eyes upon that which is not? For riches certainly make themselves wings. They fly away as an eagle toward heaven. Eat thou not the bread of him that hath an evil eye, neither desire thou his dainty meats. For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. Eat and drink, saith he to thee, but his heart is not with thee. The morsel which thou hast eaten shalt thou vomit up, and lose thy sweet words. Speak not in the ears of a fool, for he will despise the wisdom of thy words. And you think about what's going on here. Okay? So in the first thing we have, don't sit down with a ruler, right? And to be careful if you sit down with a ruler, because there's always an ulterior motive. I mean, there's been some presidents and political candidates that I've really liked, but they are what they are. Okay? In fact, we're reading the memoirs. You wouldn't call it an autobiography because it's not really in a chronological order, but the memoirs of George W. Bush. Okay? And there's some encouraging moments that he recounts in there, like in the death of his grandmother and how George H.W. Bush sat down and read the Bible to her beside the bed, during her last days, and the various encounters he and his family had. But let us not forget, he won 2 elections. Well, he won more than 2. He won 4 elections. Okay? And he reveals in the book how he won those 4 elections. Okay? And though he likes to credit God for the wins, there was a lot of back scratching and underhanded, what I would call dirty dealings, because you're not going to get there without doing that. Okay? And so as much as I liked the guy, I liked his personality, I think is what it was. You say he finally had much of a personality. I know, but those type of people really actually crack me up. And Susan's laughing because she knows I always find these people that she's like, oh, and they have they're as dry as corn husks, and but they crack. I love being around them. I love talking to them because they just crack me up. And I think they know they crack me up too. And so they try to be even dry. They try to be funny, which makes it even funnier to me. And so that's cruel, right? But they do. I mean, I could tell you, I name you names of people all the same person. I just like those people. They crack me up. Putting that aside, okay, I liked his personality, but he was a politician, a successful politician that won 4 elections, twice the governor, first person to ever win 2 terms of governor, and then he got 2 terms in the White House consecutively. So the book reveals the truth. There was a lot of back scratching, compromising, and dirty dealing that went on in order to win those elections because you had to pull support. And then getting policies passed is even worse. You really got to sleep with the enemy in order to get policies passed. It is what they do. It's how they get it done. And sometimes it's just really unpleasant, but that's how they get the job done. But then you have labor not to be rich. Two things, power and profit, are some of the biggest hindrances to people's happiness. The obsession with power will always compromise your moral character somewhere down the line. And you won't like the person that you become. But the pursuit of profit is just as bad. Because here the person in Proverbs clearly states, labor not to be rich. Now, he didn't say don't labor. He didn't say don't have riches. What he said was, and I'm not trying to compromise here, I'm just observing. He didn't say you couldn't be rich. And he definitely didn't say don't labor. He just said don't make the purpose of your labor the ultimate goal of just being rich. Right? And then he goes on to explain why. He says, well, why would you set your eyes on that which is not? For riches do what? They certainly make themselves wings. They fly away as an eagle toward heaven. Right? So, why would you pursue after riches when riches are not? Now, I do point out this. There's a difference between riches and wealth. Wealth is something that has more than just materialistic value. Okay? It's, you know what I'm saying? It's not like things are just going to fly away. It has substance to it. And you may not have a lot of riches, but you can be wealthy. I know sometimes we use the term interchangeably, but I think when the scripture is using the two terms, it's not necessarily using them interchangeably. It's like I consider the fact that I have my wife that makes me a wealthy person. Okay? And I have a little home that I live in makes me a wealthy person. It's not the most expensive home. Okay? And my car, you know what I'm saying? I have things. They're not the most expensive things. I don't have a large bank account. Okay? But I consider I'm happy. I have things, and again, they not the most expensive things, but they perform their functions. I got hats that are over 30 years old. I was ironing one of them yesterday, flattening it out, getting it back into shape because it fell out of the basket and got crumpled, and I have to do that now. And I got one hat I bought when I graduated the first time from seminary. I still have that hat. I've got another hat. I'm just getting in my hats here. I got another hat that it's a hat I wear every time I work on a church building. You saw it. It's the white little ball cap looking thing. Well, I had got that hat, okay, when we were on deputation before we went to England. And I've had that same hat, and I have painted so many interiors of church buildings wearing that hat, right? It only comes, I don't wear it around the house or when I'm doing yard work. I have something else I wear. But that hat is 25 to 30 years old. Now, it's got paint from every paint. I can look at that. That was from that building. That was from that building. That was from that building. Because I'm a sloppy painter. No, I've actually gotten better at it. But not when this poor old hat comes out. And so there's paint all over this hat. Now, you say, well, it's not a very expensive hat, not a great deal. No, but it's wealth. Because of something that I've had that reminds me of all the things that God has allowed me to do. And it's just a hat that sits there. I mean, it's nothing. It wasn't expensive when I bought it. And I doubt you can sell it on eBay. But you understand the difference between, it's not the most expensive house. It's not the most expensive car. It may not be the most, job of notoriety. You know what I'm saying? But it's a good job. And it's an honest job. It's not the fattest income, but it's a steady income. And it pays the bills. And to have a life like that, that's wealth. That's wealth. And there are people out there that could buy and sell us 10 times over that are completely unhappy. Because around them, there's nothing like that. There's not a little old hat. You know what I'm saying? There's nothing like that they can look back and say, wow, what a rich, what a wonderful life I've had. What great opportunities that I've experienced. And God, I've seen God do. When I close my eyes, it's flooded with memories of God doing amazing things and letting me see amazing things. And it's like, sometimes we get together with other preachers and their family, and the typical question always comes out, well, how many are you running? What is it like? What's your building's worth? And last time I was at a place like that, they go, how's it going? I said, it's going. It's going. That's not because I'm unsatisfied. I am so blessed to have been here, and this is amazing. We've had people come through and go. Who cares? I am blessed to have you guys around me, and pray for me and support me. This is amazing. I look forward to coming every Sunday and speaking and I'm just, because that's the difference between wealth, scripturally, and riches. We're wealthy. We may not be rich, but we're wealthy in that we have things around us and people around us that God has given to us that truly, and I know it's going to sound like I'm saying the one and the same thing because it's our language, but enriched our lives and make our lives so blessed, And really, I think that's where you get down to wealth, is things that are truly a blessing. Because riches don't bless. Riches bring sorrow. Riches bring concern. One time, I was with a friend who did security on the side, and we were actually out doing some visits and things, and he suddenly got this call from this person he had installed a security system for, and she wanted him to come out right away and check her security system. Okay, so he said, "I'm sorry, Brother Vern, I got to run. Let's go if you don't mind, because we were in one car. If you don't mind, do you mind going with me over here?" I said, "No, I don't care. That's fine." So we drove on out to this place, and a lot of oil. A lot of oil. And so we drove out to this place, and this is what this was. And we drove out there, and we entered into this massive gate, looked like it from Jurassic Park. And and started going down this drive, horses running, thoroughbred horses running all through the front. And then you had to cross over this bridge to get to and there was a moat under the bridge, and this massively, beautifully designed home sitting there. And we drove over the bridge, and horses running between the front gate and the moat, thoroughbred horses. We got over there. We took the little snaky drive around back to the carport and parked, and there was a 20-space carport back around the house. We pulled up back there, and there's all kinds of outbuildings and various things going on. And so we pulled in there and parked, and we got out, and we went inside the house for him to check everything, Oh, my mercy. What a place. There were expensive tapestries on the wall, just hanging like picture hang up. And she had her dining table laid out, had stuff on it had plates. She wasn't having no parties, nothing. And they were all gold plated. It was unreal. And she had more in cabinets on the wall, and we would walk, because we had to go room to room to room to check all the sensors and stuff. And so I'm looking at this thinking, oh my goodness, wonder what size family lives here. Just her. That's it. Just her. She's the only one who lived there. And so we went and checked this great big old dog. Oh my goodness, she could have saddled it and rode this dog. It was such a big, hairy dog. Just a big, hairy dog. And it was following us around, friendly thing, but following us around and everywhere. And my friend was testing the sensors and things, and didn't find anything wrong. He's like, I don't see anything wrong. She goes, well, you know how it is. You just never know when a thief's going to come and break. And she was like, I'm like, you know what? I'd rather have my peace of mind back in my little one-bedroom apartment with my wife than to sit in this great big old home and be calling people out to check a security system that it would take a team of G.I. Joes to get to your house in the first place. Okay? Because it's so far set back from the road. Okay? And you got to get through all these thoroughbred horses, swim across the moat, you know what I'm saying? They have to take a helicopter to get there. By that time, you should know they're there, you know what I'm saying? And yet she's just panicking over all this stuff. And if they say that's riches versus wealth. Now, people would say, oh, she's wealthy. Well, I get how you're saying that, but it's not really wealth, because it doesn't give her any comfort. It doesn't give her any peace. She's panicking all the time. you know. And it was just, I mean, it's a beautiful house. Don't get me wrong. Beautiful house, well taken care of. I'm sure she had a team of maids because I don't think she actually cleaned anything. And I know she didn't take care of the dog because she said so. She had the gardeners feed the dog. And she couldn't understand why the dog wasn't very affectionate toward her. My friend says, well, try feeding the dog and maybe he'll think you're the one in charge. He was very blunt with her, you know. But anyway, but labor not to be rich. Okay, our goal in life ought not be how much we can accumulate. But our goal in life ought to be, you know, wealth, fine. Labor, yes. Okay. But, you know, I was interesting because I was listening to a guy who was talking about, he's a wealthy man, famous man, rich even one would say. But he actually was doing an interview and he was commenting on the obsession of people in our time. Where he says, when I was young, nobody asked you how much you made. They just asked you what you did. And as long as you had an occupation, nobody cared how much you made. Nobody even asked. Right? Matter of fact, there used to be a program called What's My Line, right? Not how much do you make, but what's my... And they brought people, all kinds of people. You know, the incomes had to be crazily varying, you know, from... But it didn't matter because everybody was treated with, what's my line? What job do you do? One lady tested diet pills. I mean, that's just how it was. You know, I'm sure she wasn't, you know, setting up for the rest of her life by testing diet pills. But, you know, they even had Colonel Sanders on there one time. It was quite funny. And so, you know, but it used to be about what do you do? Not how much do you make. But let's face it, nowadays, people don't really care. It's how much do you make. Right? Because they're after riches. They labor to be rich. People do things in order to make money. They don't do things in order to have a purpose and have value and to contribute to society. You know, it's all about the money. And if they don't get the money they think they're worth or they deserve, and nowadays it's so bad because I have to deal with the young generation. Nowadays, they don't have to be good at their job. They just should be making this because they are who they are. So it's literally down to how much money. They don't even care to have an ability, something to do that gives them value. It's all down to the money they make. Okay? And so they don't want to stick, because one lady came to me, she goes, how long have you worked for this company? And I said, well, technically I've worked for the company about 8.5 years now. And they go, you stayed here that long? I've never stayed at a place more than like a year. Okay. That's not encouraging to know. And it's all about the money. Money. Got to make the money. I'm like, well, I mean, and so I tried to encourage him. I said, well, if you stick around long enough, you might actually become good at the job. And once you become good at the job, they might consider paying you a little more. But they're hardly going to invest that much money into somebody who's not going to stick around. But that's the mindset. And so that's why a lot of them are trying to make money as lifestyle influencers. But I think what they're going to find out is this going to be like trying to be a Hollywood star or musician? A whole lot of people try. Very few actually accomplish anything and become notary. And I think the lifestyle influencers are going to find themselves in the same kind of situation, that they're going to find that very few are going to have the following of Joe Rogan, who is the most prolific lifestyle influencer and podcaster of our day. He's got millions following him. Okay? Millions, which is why shirking his interview was not a smart idea. Nope. That's a whole lot of people you just stood up. And anyway, so, but that's how come, but he's got millions. But there are podcasters that are 13 years old. Okay? They ain't got millions of people. And they ain't gonna be, and they think, I'm gonna do this for a living. No, probably not. You know? I personally, I mean, I just look at it as these are people who have been raised by the TV culture, and now they want to live on TV instead of realizing that's fiction and that's entertainment, and the real world is out there. It's not on that screen, but that's all they know, and so on that screen they're going to go. And I saw this one lady standing up trying to lecture me well, she wasn't trying to lecture me personally, but lecture on the British royal family. And she looked like she came out of the south side of Shreveport. And she's up there with her jive talking, gang lingo, trying to explain the line of succession for the British royal family. And like, did you just lack content today? And so you decided just to wax eloquent about something you obviously know nothing about? Because, if this was a test, she would have failed miserably. Okay? Because she didn't know squat. But there she is in her hoodie, being her lifestyle influencer and try to explain. And that's a running joke the way I say it like that. So I'm just saying. And there's but labor not to be rich. So power and profit. Do you realize these are two things that the child of God doesn't have to seek after? You don't have to pursue this in your life. I don't have to pursue this power and profit. Because power belongeth unto God. All the power I need is in my Heavenly Father. He sets them up and He takes them down. I heard a preacher make a very interesting observation. Remember the story of the writing on the wall, right? Belshazzar. And God comes down to Belshazzar and writes on the wall his doom, essentially. And they call Daniel in to interpret it, right? But the interesting thing this preacher pointed out is that God says, you've been weighed in the balance and you come up short. It's talking about the king. The king was not a believer. And a lot of people say, well, yeah, sure, you're a Christian. God has a standard for you to live, and He expects you to, to operate a certain way because you're a believer. But this guy wasn't a believer. And God had a standard of operation for him and said, you've fallen short. So I'm cutting you off tonight. I'm done with you because you've not been. He was a heathen king, and God says, but I set you up as king, and you have failed to meet my expectations, and so I'm taking you down tonight. I thought, that's very interesting, because God didn't say, Daniel, you've come short, or all my children of Israel, you come short. It's this heathen king. He says, I've weighed you in the balance, and you come short. So God had a balance for the heathen king. And so power belongs to God. God sets him up. God takes him down. And even our political elected think, well, I don't believe in God. It doesn't mean God doesn't have a standard He's looking and judging them by. So, well, they're not believers. Yeah, but His sovereignty isn't limited to those who believe in Him. He is the God of the universe, all created things. Okay? They may not bow to Him. They may rebel against Him. But that doesn't take away His ability to rule them. And He does rule them. Okay? Whether they like it or not. He rules them. Okay? There is nothing that goes on that God is not aware and allows to happen. Okay? Now there are things that happen that God would prefer not to happen. And He lets them happen because He's going to use it to His honor and to His glory. But understand this. Nothing happens outside of God's ability to stop it. If He wanted to stop it. Okay? He could prevent the birth of some. He could have prevented the birth of Hitler if He wanted to. He's God. Okay? But He chose not to. And He chose to let... As a matter of fact, a lot of these guys that rise to power, when I watch their stories, I'm like, how in the world did they rise to power? There is nothing about these people that should put them... As a matter of fact, they should be the opposite of it. But they get there. Well, there's only one way. God lets them get there. And God promotes them for His glory and for His honor. So how is that glory and honor? God's thoughts are not our thoughts, and His ways are not our ways. What He sees as glory and honor and what we see as glory and honor don't always measure up. But what we have to do is we have to surrender to the fact that power belongs unto God. And power is not something we need to pursue because we're God's children. Right? That makes every one of us a prince and a princess. Okay, it doesn't make every one of us both those things. But you're either a prince or a princess, right? You don't have to worry about power. You are the child of the sovereign of the universe. How much more power do you need? All you have to do is come boldly before the throne of your Heavenly Father and present your petitions. And He can make the sun stand still and the moon stand still and rearrange the stars at His will. It's not hard. He'll do it. Okay? And remarkably enough, even if He does, time doesn't roll backwards. You ever notice that? That's the first thing to let me know that time travel was a myth, because we reverse the earth or reverse the stars, everything is, how in the TV shows, everything reverses back. And yet, the sundial went back 15 degrees, the moon and the sun stood still, and people just kept going on. Time didn't go whoop, 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 because the sun went backwards on the sundial for help me, Hezekiah. And when Joshua commanded the sun to stand still and the moon to stand still, and God obeyed the voice of a man, and he made him stand still, you know what? Everybody didn't go boom, like in Star Trek, boom, because time has been frozen. They just kept on fighting. So why do we need to snuggle up next to politicians? The politicians ought to be snuggling up to us, because they're lost selves. They don't have any power. They're pawns in God's great chess game, right? Ultimately, you want the children of God praying for you if you're a politician. You want them petitioning their heavenly Father on your behalf. Because one, He has a standard for your behavior, and if you don't match it, He will replace you. He will take you down in a major way. But you know what? The children of God will go on. Proof text. Israel. Where's the Babylonian Empire? Where's the Grecian Empire? Where's the Medo-Persian Empire? Right? But guess who's still here? God's chosen people. Many a Roman emperor persecuted Christians. Where are they? But Christians are still here. So one preacher said, Nero persecuted the Christians and said he'd wipe them all out. Now we name our children Paul and call our dogs Nero. So if I were a politician, I'd want the children of God begging for God on my behalf, because that's where the power truly lies, with those who have the ear of the sovereign of the universe. And as far as riches go, why do we need to pursue those? I'll give you a verse. John 6:27. Labor not for the meat which perisheth, but for that meat which endureth unto everlasting life, which the Son of Man shall give unto you, for him hath God the Father sealed. So labor not for this perishing meat. Labor not for that. God doesn't need the Dow Jones Industrial Average to go up to take care of His children. I've said it before to other missionary students. God can take care of you whether you're in a capitalist economy, a socialist economy, or a communist economy, or a monarchy. God can take care of you. He doesn't need a capitalist economy to take care of His children. Okay? People try to make capitalism and the Scripture one and the same. And it's like, no. There's going to be so many disappointed Christians one day when they realize that when Jesus comes back, He's not setting up a constitutional republic that's going to work off the principle of capitalism. He's setting up a monarchy of which He is complete and utter sovereign. Okay? And so, suck it up, Buttercup. Okay? You are going to bow to the King. Even those that don't believe in Him will be forced to bow to Him. Okay? Because He will be King of everything. And I know people say, He's going to rule and reign for 1,000 years. Well, I think that creates a misconception that the kingdom is going to end after 1,000 years. No, Jesus ain't say, okay, now we're all just going to be equal. It's not what's going to happen. At the end of the 1,000 years, the devil's let loose. There's one final rebellion. He puts it down, and He's just going to go on being king. And the world will travel along with His saints serving Him and worshiping Him all the way into beyond time. It's like the person the other day said, I'm beyond an adult. I got called beyond an adult. Because she was trying to argue something. He's an adult. Matter of fact, he's beyond an adult. I'm like, what are you saying? I am a fossil or something over here? What's beyond an adult? We got infant, toddler, child, teenager, adult, fossil. And I've crossed over the line. I'm no longer considered an adult. I'm beyond an adult. I think it went stinking little wet behind the ears thing saying I'm beyond an adult. It's like those kids who talk like back in the 1900s. Wait, take that for? What do you mean? What do you say it like that for? Maybe back in the 1900s. You say it like it was 10 centuries ago, okay? It's, it's not that far. I'm back in the 1900s. I promise you. When I was born, we had the automobile and microwaves. It wasn't that far beyond us. We had television sets, color ones. I didn't. We always had black and white when I was growing up. But my dad didn't see any need for a color television set. When I finally got a color television, I couldn't believe how wrong I was about the color of a lot of things. Because black and white, sometimes things just don't come off right. You think, that's got to be black. And you turn around and it's like bright blue or something like that. And it just come across wrong on the black and white TV. But they do that. Back in the 1900s, well, now I'm advanced to beyond adult. I'm no longer an adult. I'm beyond an adult. So, Sister Mary, I don't know what that makes you. If I'm beyond an adult, I don't know what you are. Because I'm not sure where these age categories go on this scale. So, oh my goodness, I couldn't believe I got called that the other day. And it was so sincere. He's beyond an adult. Like, what? Yes, my age-wise, I'm beyond an adult. Now, I know what they were going for because they were talking about, these people who met up and talked about a program. I have no idea what it is. I don't have a clue what this program is. I don't have the streaming platform. I'm not interested in the streaming platform. And they were talking about this thing and they're about finishing up season 2. And one of them turned to me and says, "Oh, you need to watch this as well." And the other person who knew I was a pastor said, No, he doesn't. You do not need to watch this program. And he goes, yeah. I'm like, and the other one goes, No, he does not need to watch this program. And they went back and forth. And, no, he does not need to watch this program. And then she said, why? He's an adult. No, he's beyond an adult. That's your maturity. And that's your spiritual maturity. Is that what it is? And I just took it as an insult. And and later on, the one that was saying no, he doesn't need to watch it, came back and said, no, because he's a pastor, he doesn't need to watch this. You know, that to me, that's a hilarious statement. As a pastor, I shouldn't watch it. But apparently, if you're not a pastor, go ahead. You know? But they've made that distinction and they're saying it out loud. So it's like, wait a minute. Okay, what's wrong for me is wrong for you. If I shouldn't be watching it, neither should you. And they're going to list all the things I believe. They haven't told me, but I'm sure it's a raunchy little old program. Is probably what it is. But and that's because that's usually the context of why they say, oh no, he shouldn't watch it. You know, the first one thought it was just, I'm beyond an adult. And then the other one came back and said, no, because it's a pastor. But truthfully, I love that double standard that's created. You're a pastor. You shouldn't, or you should. And it's like, and what makes pastor flesh any different than your flesh? I'm failing to see this, I mean, I know the reasoning behind it, but that's where it goes back down to the people's problems of turning preachers into Christ. That we're supposed to walk on water, raise the dead, and have a sinless. Our mother was a virgin. She had us. That's what they literally expect. And then when we don't measure up, then they turn on Christ. Well, that pastor's such a hypocrite. No, he's a human being, and you held him up on a pedestal that was impossible for any human being to. That God doesn't even put a preacher on, okay, and expect, because God knows we're but flesh. I'm not saying we shouldn't set an example, but at the same time, but then they create this double standard. Oh, you can't do that. You can't go there. You can't say that. You can't watch that because you're a pastor. But I claim to be a Christian, and I can go there, and I can watch that, and I can say that, and I can do that, and whatever. I'm not a pastor. Wow. Wow, as Gordon Ramsay would say. But what an absolute bunch of bunk. But anyway, so as a Christian, we don't have to worry about riches. Why? Because we've got the Lord. And if you've got the Lord, let me tell you something. Be content. Isn't that what the Scripture admonishes us to do? We have the Lord. Be content. Be content. Because there's nothing you need that He can't provide. So there's no reason to pursue. I know one young man who dropped out of church and everything. His father was a minister. And they did well. They're very comfortable, you know. They didn't have the nicest of homes and the nicest of, as you would think, but they were comfortable. Everything was fine. No, I mean, nobody was starving. I mean, you know what I'm saying? The bills were paid. But he didn't think his mother was living at a high enough standard. So he said, I'm not going to live for, his words, I'm not going to live for God. I'm going to make money because I want my mother to live at a higher standard than what she's living. Now, I'm going to give you just a little insight here. Okay. I think he got that attitude because she was complaining. Because if mama was content and happy, why would he be upset with God? And when you add to that, he followed that path, then she followed quickly behind him. And then everybody's out of church, but pursuing riches. Now they got the nice cars. Now they got the nice house. Now they're wearing the expensive clothes. But you know, it's sort of God's old statement. Yeah, fatness to your flesh, but leanness to your souls. I'd much rather have a robust, healthy relationship with my God, because I know my God will take care of me. He'll give me what He thinks I need, not necessarily what I think I need, but what He thinks I need, than to have all the riches the world could give you, all the fame and influence. That's why I'm so scared of a lot of pastors and churches today, because they're seeking power and profit. And then Christians are seeking power and profit. Because when you go seeking power and profit, there's only one obvious conclusion that I can draw, that you've turned your back on God. That you don't believe God is enough. Now you have to have worldly pleasures. And you have to have worldly... And by the way, it never turns out well. Because now you've made power and profit an idol. In class, let me tell you something. The one thing God will strike out at fast is idolatry. He does not tolerate idolatry. His name is jealous, and He will not tolerate idolatry. If He'll kick Israel out of the promised land for idolatry, He'll strike down a Christian for idolatry too. And so how will He strike them down? Thunderbolts, lightning, earthquakes? Right here. God can do more damage by afflicting the mind. So He wouldn't do that to a believer. Really? You mean like Saul? His anointed? The God selected out of the entire crowd? And He sent a troubling spirit? By the way, even after the troubling spirit, Saul was still considered to be among the prophets. And he prophesied. But he still had a mental condition. Because he decided to be prophet, priest, and king. Which only one person has that role. That's the Lord Jesus. Even Samuel wouldn't venture to be king. Prophet and priest he was. King he would never do. But when Saul offered the sheep, see, most people think all the upset was he didn't kill Agag. Well, he should have killed Agag. But the real problem was he offered the offerings, which that made him prophet, because he was a prophet, king, but when he offered the sacrifice, he became priest, and only one holds all three offices. So Saul set himself up as God, because only Christ is prophet, priest, and king. And that's why he got overthrown. And that's why God said, I'm done with you. and I'll find someone else. And David was an adulterer and a murderer. But you know what David never did? He never tried to be prophet, priest, and king. He never tried to be his own God. Never claimed it, never thought it, never went that direction. A man he was, and flawed as all get out. But at the same time, God looked down and said, but at least he ain't going to try to be me. And if I'm going to put a man on this throne, it's going to be somebody who's going to figure out that he isn't God. And he's never going to try to be God. David wasn't a prophet. David never tried to be priest. Right? He was just king. Through him came the prophet, priest, and king. But David himself says, I'm not. That was Saul's sin. And if God will strike down Saul with a mental affliction, yes, I'm afraid God can strike down his children today with a mental affliction that literally causes you to self-destruct. And how sad that will be. How sad that will be when we make idols out of power and profit. And I think that's how come time we see some of these preachers fall. And we think to ourselves, how could they even think that? Wow, there you go. How could they even think that was going to ever work? Because nobody in his right mind would ever think that's going to work. Well done. But he's a preacher, and Saul was king. And God can strike the mind faster than you can strike anything else, and will strike it. And that's why we have to be so careful. Well, let's go ahead and pray, and then we'll be dismissed. Father, thank you so much